Well, welcome. This is the second class in the series on pathways to freedom, evolution, and the next step. And a bit of an introduction. The last time we referred to what we call the simulation that we live in. So we want to clarify what that means. The simulation just means a very limited perception of the reality in which we actually exist. So the point is not to try to live in the simulation. Spirituality is described as a process of awakening, so it's awakening from that very limited vantage point which keeps us from being able to experience both the fullness of ourself and the fullness of the world that we live in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's helpful to, I don't know if you've seen, if you're a fan of science fiction, or if you are not, but The Matrix as a movie series, it's a helpful way of thinking that there is a reality we might be seeing and experiencing and living within that might seem all there is. And it might seem as though we are functioning and living in all of the fullness. And what the suggestion of the idea of simulation is that, yes, what it is that you're living in is real, and it's not all of the real. That there is a real, a whole real, R-E-A-L, that is possible. If you read through all kinds of stories, I, of course, use a lot of sacred stories from the Old Testament and New Testament, you hear this kind of theme referred to regularly. It's the real that Moses was experiencing as he lived in Midian. And then as he was taking a walk with some sheep, he saw a bush burning. And that bush, he paused and saw that the bush was not consumed. And then what unfolds is a conversation with God in the bush, as the scriptures say, an angel, whispering to him something profound. And you can almost see Moses going, oh no. There's something not just else, but more. It's not else as in over there. It's actually more of what's here, and it's always been here. And for various reasons, we live in this space, but there's this moreness that is right here.
So the question arises, how to free ourselves from our conditioning. And our conditioning is what we're used to. And we're so used to it that we don't even consider the possibility that there could be something different from the world of our senses and the world created by our concepts that we have about what the world is, about who we are in relationship to the world. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, we need to have an intention for what we're looking for. So I like to use an example. If you open up the Google search box, and it's got a box that you're supposed to type something in, but you don't type in anything, you hit enter, what's going to happen? Nothing. Google doesn't know what you're looking for, so if you don't know what you're looking for, you're going to have a hard time finding it or moving towards that. So there needs to be an intention. It's not enough just to let go of the previous ways of perception, conception, reactions to circumstances, because that'd be like just erasing something. Well, what are you looking for to come in instead of that? What's your purpose? What's your deepest desire? What's your ideal sense of self? How would you like for your life in the world to be different? So one thing I'd like to have us take a look at, and we'll go through these one by one and go back and forth with Jonathan and me, what I call some axioms. Like basic arithmetic has axioms. They're fundamental assumptions. Two numbers, A and B, A equals A plus B equals B plus A, and so on. And from that, a whole of arithmetic goes, and a lot of complex mathematics can be derived from that. So I'd like for us to try and emphasize a set of axioms, assumptions about how things are, and perhaps discover how they might transform us. So the first one is, and I'll explain what I mean by this, everything is a portal to the sacred. Well, when you hear that word portal, you might be thinking you're on a ship and you're looking through a window, and the sacred is something out there on the other side of this window. This is not it. Perhaps a better term is everything is a possibility of being on the threshold of something emerging and opening up what you're experiencing. So the sacredness is just present there. It's not coming from someplace else. It's happening in response to your way of relating to that.
It's the sense of, like, have you heard the term liminality or liminal? Right? Liminal?
Yeah.
This kind of idea that we're on a gauzy, porous threshold that is actually not really that separate from us. It's like it's always here.
Yeah.
It's always here. And I think that's really important, mainly because you'll see in some of the stories, and you'll see also in the scriptures, particularly in Paul, you'll see some of the writers, and not just Paul, but religious writers of all kinds, struggling with words to describe this sense of otherness and presentness. That it is both here, but it's not just here. Doctor Who is, again, another science fiction thing. It's this thing where it's like bigger on the inside, but then how do I access that? And what words do I use to describe that, right? So then Plato described it as this sense that there's a great big light, or use this metaphor of the cave, and that's a great metaphor of this idea of a big light that shines on us, and we can only see our reflections on the cave. But the problem with that is it geolocates the light away from us. And what we're trying to say is it's not located over there. The light is right here.
So I'm reminded
That's
of
crazy stuff, that it's not there. Sorry. Yeah.
I'm reminded of when I was doing my pre-doctoral internship at the Austin State Hospital, and I was working with some people on the alcohol and drug unit, and I was taking them through some visualizations. And this man at the end of it says, I can't visualize anything. I close my eyes and it's just black. I said, can we try something? I said, okay. So I said, imagine that you're in a room with me and I'm 20 feet away from you and I light a candle. Oh, okay, I can imagine that. Now imagine I move closer to you so the candle is lighting up things around you. And in just a few minutes, he was having this very rich experience of an inner life. He just didn't know that there was a light switch to turn on. What he wanted to experience was always available. He thought it was not accessible, so if it's not accessible. And I've used this example before. If you're familiar with tarot cards, one of the major arcana is the devil. And the devil card has a picture of a man and a woman, and they have chains on them. But if you look closely, the chains are not fastened. All they have to do is take them off. But they don't know that they're unfastened, so they sit there forever stuck. So there was a Sufi from hundreds of years ago that said, oh man, well nowadays he'd say, oh man, a woman, if you but knew that you're free, it's your thought of captivity that keeps you in chains. So it's our basic assumptions, which we don't realize are assumptions. We take the assumptions as being the reality. And if you think it's the reality, you're never going to look for anything more than that. But if you've got this inner itch for something more that's going to bring satisfaction to you, what are you going to do? You're going to go pursuing different kinds of desires, which are only at best going to provide temporary satisfaction until you go on to the next one, because you're not really looking for what's available to you that's much better than anything you think is.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. In the church, we call this real presence, right? So that's kind of my sermon today is going to talk a little bit about living Eucharistically, but this idea of real presence. So rather than say, like the idea of transubstantiation of the species of bread and wine and all those kinds of things, what we say is what's happening in the sacrament is that a real presence is happening. That's all we say. That's really all we can say, is we say real presence. We can fill lots of books with describing real presence, but really we can only say real presence. And then someone says how, and then that's when we get in trouble. We say it gets weird. But that's what we're saying. It's here.
and that presence, the word can keep us kind of stuck, because if we think about being present as something, okay, I'm present to you. I'm sitting here and I'm aware of you sitting there. Well, that's the most basic kinds of presence, simple awareness. But presence is not a noun in the sense It's a living quality that's emerging by virtue of the way that you are in relationship with what you are experiencing. So what Jonathan's talking about in the sacrament, what takes place if you have a wonderful experience in nature or listening to music or whatever, you've opened up a connection to what you're experiencing that's living, that brings forth more and more in each moment. It's not just you sitting here kind of analyzing, oh, this is so pretty, this is so nice. So, second axiom, each person is a unique manifestation of the divine who has a priceless gift to share with all of creation when we express the deepest desire of our heart. So we might think of, we have the saying, not my will, but God's will, that's supposed to come from someplace else, what it is we're supposed to be doing. But wouldn't it be wonderful to feel that what it's really all about, what the divine wants of you, is to open up the deepest desire of your heart, and that's what the divine is seeking to experience through your being, bringing forth something that only you can bring forth. That's what we call dharma, that's your spiritual purpose, and that purpose is unique for every person. It's not like acting like somebody else or becoming somebody else. It's not becoming Buddha, it's not becoming Jesus, it's becoming you, who you really are.
Yeah, as we were talking about this week, the important piece of that is what I talk about a lot is radical incarnation. That the mystery of what we talk about in the incarnation, which is the fancy name for the miracle of Jesus of Nazareth, right? That God somehow in flesh. What we're talking about when we talk about that, though, is not only the event of the birth of a baby in a little manger or on Christmas time. What the church, I think, is more fully teaching, and what the classic Christian mystics talk about, is that incarnation is an ongoing reality of the way God works. That the divine presence and God's own presence and God's own self is always incarnating all around us. And we're caught up in that. We're part of that. So then the uniqueness of you is God incarnate. And the uniqueness in this room is divine incarnate. And the uniqueness of that individual bird or that tree is the manifestation of the divine. There's another axiom that says all creation bears the marks of the Creator. Like a beautiful piece of artwork or a piece of clay or a thrown pot. If you look closely enough at anything anybody's put their hands on, or at the brushstrokes of a painting, you see the one who created it there, right? As are you. As are you. And as is here is revelatory as the way is.
And there's no end to this ongoing revelation. It's not, and this is an important point, it's not a discovery of something that's sitting out there. It's a discovery of something that is always in the process of becoming, that is transformed by you in relationship to what you are experiencing.
Always unfolding.
And so there's no end to it. The mystics say there's a new creation born at every instant. And Ibn Arabi, a great Sufi from a long time ago, said that new creation is always similar to what's been before, but it's never identical. But what do we tend to do when we have, when we have a wonderful experience? We want to grab onto it and lock into it, into our memory and recalling the emotions, which is well and good. It's fine, but after a while it loses its life because it's not something that's living right now. It was a place of emergence previously, but now there's a new one that we want to become open to.
Beautiful.
So, next assumption, axiom. We exist on multiple vibrational levels, even though we're only normally aware of our manifest self. So what I've started calling vibrational levels are also known as subtle levels of reality, what are known in different religious traditions as the angelic realm, the jinn realm. They go by different names, and just like the color spectrum is divided so many different ways for the names of the colors, the different vibrational levels are given different names. Some traditions, they have 14 of them, 7 of them. It doesn't really matter. It just means there are different aspects on which we continue to always exist. We're existing on all of these vibrational levels, However, we're normally only aware of the physical one because why? Because our consciousness is focalized on that. And we haven't yet discovered the capacity to, what I call, modulate our consciousness to experience other vibrational levels. So I'll use an analogy. If you were in training to become a sommelier, an expert wine person, you'd have to learn how to discriminate so many different tastes. In fact, I think to pass the test to become one, they give you a wine, it's not labeled. You have to not only identify what kind of wine, but the orchard it came from and probably the year that it came from the subtle tastes in there. So they develop their palate to open up to all these subtle aspects of taste and smell and so on. And a really skilled musician is going to be able to really be in tune with the sounds of overtones and the way things interplay with each other in harmonies and dissonance. Well, there's technologies, we could call them, that have been developed over the centuries of different spiritual traditions for working with consciousness. And each tradition clothes these technologies in the terminology and the imagery of the particular tradition, but those technologies don't necessarily have to be applied solely to that tradition, and they can be applied independent of any tradition. There are technologies for working with consciousness. And so we can use some of these tools, we can call them tools for transformation, and they're not, we think about transformation in the spiritual path as, okay, this is me, and I'm going to do these things, and I'm going to turn this into something else. Or I'm going to find a guru who's going to zap me and turn me into something else. That's not what's going on. Your separated identity is not being transformed, but your way of relationship to everything you experience, both inwardly and outwardly, that's what's being transformed. You can never get there. We've talked in previous classes that Jonathan and I have done about dualistic consciousness and the illusion of that, the Newtonian model of the universe. There's me and there's everything separated from me, and kind of the billiard ball model of this causes that, and time just going in one direction. But physicists have shown that's not at all the nature of reality. We live in a very different world than that, but our awareness tends to be stuck in the old frame of reference.
Yeah, and I wonder, as you and I talk about this, and as I'm hearing it, this morning, wrestling with the story that we're going to hear a little bit. A lot of what I suspect is happening in the sacred stories that we might share, that we might read, that might be gathered up in Scripture, is this intuitive sense that that's what's going on. That there are multiple energies, there are multiple ways for existence to be real, and at the same time, there's this sense, I think, also of, at least in the way the Scriptures came together, of somebody saying, okay, let's not really say all of that. Let's not really say all of it. There's this wonderful story on it's called the Transfiguration, of Jesus and some friends going up on the top of a mountaintop, and there's a moment that they have, and there's a big aha. In that moment, Jesus is said to have transfigured, that his clothes shone a bright white somehow, so the clothing he has on is transformed into a big radiance. But then appearing with him are who? Somebody know the story? Elijah and Moses, right? And then a fourth figure appears with a voice from the clouds, which is the voice of God. So we're having visual and auditory experiences that seem to involve the environment around. So there's a kind of an earthiness to it all as well. Now, there's a lot of people, and me included, who will preach that metaphorically and say it's an allegory. And it's a poetic illustration of what really is going on. At the same time, all the Gospels have that story, and other sources have that story as well. And it rhymes with another story in the Hebrew Scriptures of Moses on Mount Sinai, and it rhymes with other stories of divine presence as well, whether it's Isaiah having a vision or whether it's Elijah in the cave, of something going on. There's more than here, right? So the senses, and I wonder, we always wonder as well, I hope the church does, is that might be really what's happening. Like that really may be reality. That there may be that reality beyond this. Now, what's cool about what we talk about here, but also what science is doing, is that science is saying, reality isn't only here. This idea of multiple vibrational levels is actually true in a way, that we are always in multiple spaces. We are always in multiple places, talking about quantum physics. And I'm not a quantum physician, and I love reading and talking about it, but I don't know all of it. But part of what it says is that we are not only here. And here is not only here. Here is everywhere. And that's not only that's not only an idea, that's like scientifically, mathematically discernible and understandable. And you can look up some of the research on this. So if that's mathematically, scientifically provable now, then maybe it was revealed on a mountaintop. That maybe there was something that happened where people had a thin place, where the liminality of life, of true life, became clear to all of them. And no wonder Peter wanted to say, I'm not going back down there. I'm staying right here because this is more real than anything down there.
Yeah, so then there's the story about the angels ascending and descending the ladder.
There you go.
So what Jacob's I call ladder. That, I could talk about, we learn, first of all, how to awaken awareness in different levels. And there are practices to do this. There are practices to awaken the angelic realm of existence. But then we can learn to develop, I call it a scaffolding between our usual consciousness and that, so we can experience a continuity of our being that incorporates both of those levels simultaneously. So when we talk about things like the angelic realm, what do we think? Well, it's up there. When someone dies, where have they gone? They're on the other side. So we think of this is our conditioning, these things are someplace else, but they're no place but right here. Mm-hmm. And it's just like the animals that can perceive ultraviolet and infrared and so on. All of that is present around us, we can't perceive it. So there's a world that's much richer than what we can perceive, even with our physical senses. Well, these subtle vibrational levels are not any place else. They're different aspects of our own being. But our consciousness, the instructions that have been programmed into the core are just stay here because there's nothing more than that.
Right.
But spiritual awakening is a process of learning how to work with the wonderful gift and tool of consciousness. Again, I call it modulating, to be able to experience different vibrational levels, right, to establish a connection and a circulation between these levels, and ultimately to experience the wholeness of ourself as simultaneously existing and functioning from all of these levels at the same time, depending on what's needed and what our desire is, focusing our consciousness. I don't want to be tuning into the angelic realm when I'm driving down Crosstown Expressway, because I'm not in a hurry to get
not
there.
A good time.
So,
but maybe between here and San Antonio.
Yeah, that's right. Now they have self-driving cars that you can, although I don't trust it anyway. So these are things that anybody can learn to do. Anyone can learn how to awaken their subtle senses. It's a capacity that every human being has that we can do.
And all the traditions talk about it too.
Yeah.
That's the crazy part.
Yeah.
As we pull it apart and open up the possibility, Christianity has this contemplative, vibrating heart from the very, very beginning. This and the mystics, and you start reconnecting with the ancient traditions of the desert mystics, the earliest monastics in the 1st and 2nd century, all kind of tapping into this. There's something other going on here.
Yeah, so that's the next axiom, right, which I've just really said. We can learn ways to experience subtle levels of our own being and of reality. And the next one, which I mentioned just now, eventually we can learn to experience the fullness of our being existing on many levels while modulating consciousness to operate in whatever level is needed at the time. So this is something you can do. So you can hear this, and those of you that are listening to this on YouTube might think, oh, okay, they're saying this, that's great, that's how I really am. Well, it'd be like if you were getting trained to be a musician or an artist, and you go, well, I don't need to take any training because I've purchased a set of all the colors that there are and the right kind of brushes. Well, probably not gonna. And I'm reminded of a story of someone who offered training, a psychologist in hypnosis, and he related this story. One time, one of his clients wanted him to hypnotize him so that when he played the piano, it would sound like a concert pianist. And the psychologist said, sure, I can do that. And he said, to you, it'll sound like a concert pianist, but to everybody else, it's just going to be noise. I mean, you can't take a shortcut like that. That's why the spiritual path requires guidance and training, and there's so many different schools and traditions to pick from. And from any of these schools, authentic schools, you can learn these kinds of skills, but the aim ultimately is to be able to find your own inner guidance and to be able to live and chart your own pathway in the world.
Mm-hmm. I love the metaphor of school, right? There's a great writer, Brian McLaren, who talks about his vision for the future of the church is that we become schools, is that we embrace that we are schools of love. And that we recognize that that's our calling. And I would suggest that really is the only thing that the church is there for. I think that's really important. And when I say church, I mean religious practice. Let me just say religious practice. Remember that religious practice is not about itself. Religious practice, going to church or going to a place of worship, saying the prayers, doing the body postures, if your religious practice has that, it's not about that, right? All of those are training materials to facilitate the awakening that we're talking about. So the reason to go to church is not to go to church or to go to synagogue or to go to temple or wherever that is. The reason to go is so that you can be trained and the ongoing transformation that is happening here. One of the ways I say it is, it's not about it's not about going to church. It's all about going to church at the same time. That we never do this without showing up. I have a gym membership. Okay, it's amazing how unfit I am, even though I have a gym membership. It's miraculous, I think. It turns out I don't go to the gym. Oh, I'm not experiencing transformation. I'm not experiencing insight. And I don't have a faithful practice. That's weekly, that's daily. Yeah, you know what? That transformation is not going to happen unless you practice it. It's just the way it works. And churches help, or communities of faith, communities of practice help. So if one of you good at yoga, join a yoga group.
So the next axiom, we can learn to live in a non-dualistic way of being while maintaining our unique sense of identity. And this is something I think is missing from many spiritual schools historically, because oftentimes the aim is just to totally get rid of any sense of your individuality and dissolve into something else beyond. And I've talked about this in previous classes: nirvana, moksha, mukti, liberation, salvation, whatever you want to call it. But it's something away from here, and it's demeaning our manifestation here. Well, our manifestation is sacred. This is a sacred vehicle we've been gifted with. Pure Malaya called it, our bodies are our spacesuit for experiencing the conditions of planet Earth.
I love that.
And there are means of enabling this process of awakening. So there's something on the menu that we didn't know was there besides dualism, which is here's me and everything else is separate from me, and dissolution of identity and going someplace else, erasing yourself. And the in-between state I call relational unity. You very much maintain the uniqueness of your being, but now you're experiencing a circulation that takes place in your relationship with whatever it is you're experiencing, whether it's another person, something in nature, an experience in an inner realm. So think about vibrational levels. Well, vibrations, there's waves going. Well, we're not just this physical particle being. We have an aspect of ourself that goes far beyond our body, and there's basic practices, which I don't know if we'll get to any of them today, but to awaken to the fact that our energy, the light of our being, our breath even, the effect of our being, the effect of our thoughts even extends far beyond our physical self. And then we can discover how to experience a living, unfolding relationship. And one term of this in the Sufis is tawil, T-A-W-I-L, which means harmonic perception. Pure Vilayat would say seeing beyond that which appears, seeing beyond the surface appearance. And it's not just you as this separate self. Now I see the true nature of the rose. You can't perceive that unless you've opened up to the true nature of your own being. And now these are both in relationship with each other, and there's a circulation of light between them. And that's where the insights and the realizations take place.
There's this, one of the sayings I'm familiar with is, it's not about you, but it's all about you. All at the same time. So with dualism, you'd say, oh, it's not about me and just end, or it's not about me and it's end. But it's both of those deep insights at the same time, which is that I am not the center of everything that's going on here, and my work is to empty myself of myself. And at the same time, recognize that the only work I can authentically do and the only spacesuit that I have is uniquely mine, is uniquely right here. Yeah.
So I was just remembering the Wizard of Oz for some reason.
Yeah.
It just popped up here because there's no place like home.
Right.
Which is what you've been saying many times. And then the other part I want to say is that this is, or learning, being in a church and listening to what the words on Sundays and all that, right. It's like a tasting menu. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you get a taste of that, and it kind of awakens something within you. But to make it all work together, we are coming from that home. Mm-hmm. That there is no place like home. And at the same time, we're resonating with everything that we're listening to and relating to everything that we're listening to. That's what makes us unfold. That
reminds me of my favorite saying in the I Ching, the Chinese book of changes. It says, if it's here, it's everywhere. If it's not here, it's nowhere to be found. And it also says, if it's yours, you can't lose it. And if it's not yours, you can't keep it. So why worry? Mm-hmm.
Say that again.
If it's yours, you can't lose it. If it's not yours, you can't keep it. So why worry? Mm-hmm. That we think we're trying to get to some place. That's the first illusion. And we think that place we're trying to get to is somewhere other than right here in the actual reality we live in, and that's the second illusion. And if we think it's anything other than what's already available to us, except we have veils clouding our vision, our perception, our ability to understand, then that's the work that needs to be done. And the veils can't just all be ripped away. Sometimes people back in the psychedelic era would do drugs, and sometimes those were stimuluses for them to pursue a spiritual path because they could experience a oneness with everything. But sometimes people would just totally freak out because they would be experiencing a reality that they had no way of processing and handling. So we need to go in a way that can build a bridge from where we were to where we're getting to, where it's not just totally ripping away everything and there's nothing holding us in that in-between state. And that's, again, why it's very helpful to have guidance on the path, to have someone to be a source of reassurance to you and help you, especially go through those periods where it seems like everything is just totally confusing and you don't know what's next.
The ancient Eastern mystics, still not the current Eastern mystics in Christianity, the Eastern tradition in Christianity, calls that divinization. Not divination, it's a different thing. But divinization, where we are on the path of opening ourselves to the divine within us and becoming the divine, but not that also includes not losing ourselves in the process, that we're caught up in that. So we're not trying to replace ourselves with something else. We're trying to allow what is unfolding and true to become fully true in us. So the ancient path of divinization. And, I think that's actually what Paul was talking about when he talks about the body of Christ. I don't think when he was talking in Corinthians that he was saying, isn't this a nice idea that we can all be the body of Christ? He said, no, that's actually both who you are and who you are becoming. You are already the body of Christ, and you are fully on a path to become the body of Christ. And he says elsewhere in Corinthians, whoever is in Christ is a new creation. There's this whole new thing that is happening with all of the energy of creation, with all of the whispering of the unruly waters and over all of the multiple days and all of God saying, it is good, it is good. All of that is going on in us. New creation is unfolding. And by the way, he doesn't say he is it, she is. He says that the one who is in Christ, and in Greek it just says new creation, almost as a proclamation. Not therefore there is, or there is, with all those words that we in English tend to say. It's just whoever is in Christ, new creation. It's just happening right there.
Well, and back to
I love that.
the uniqueness and not trying to become like somebody else. There's this beautiful passage in the Bhagavad Gita, the scriptures that says, better one's own dharma, however imperfectly performed, than to do the dharma of another, however perfectly done. So this is so important. We're not trying to become someone else. We can have an ideal. Well, I would like to be like this great being in their aspects of boundless compassion and so on. That's great to awaken those qualities in ourselves, but we're not trying to turn in to someone else. So there's two more axioms here.
Just two.
Just two. Through the circulation and interplay of the light of our being with the light of whatever we are in relationship with, new understandings become available that could not have taken place solely from ourselves or from what we are in a relationship with. So this new creation is an ongoing process. The second part of the title of this series, Pathways to Freedom, the next word is evolution. So what drives evolution? It's not us, okay, now we've awakened our subtle senses, we can see the deeper nature of reality, and I see how it's all unfolding and evolving. No, it's true, all that's happening, but you have a unique part to play in that, and in your unique way of relationship with whatever you're experiencing, and from the light that circulates in both directions, now new wisdom arises that brings forth further possibilities for evolution of everything that could never have happened just from you, or could never happen just from whoever you're in relationship with. So if you're sitting with Buddha, there's things that can happen from that relationship that could never happen from the Buddha, or you. So think about that. Every circumstance in our life, as we learn how to open up to a different way of relationship that's not dualistic, that is circulatory, that is always enhancing what comes through, that we're furthering the whole purpose of existence, the furtherance of, the Sufis say, the awakening of divinity and manifestation. Well, guess what? Each of you has a vital part to play in that. And that's just not a bunch of words, that's true. That the purpose of the creation of everything can't be complete without your participation in a way that can only happen from you. So here's the last axiom that relates to this. Our process of awakening is a divine service, not just for our own benefit. We start out, and this is very normal thinking, I want to become illuminated, I want to become enlightened, and so on. And that certainly was a motivation for me for a very long time. But at a certain point, I realized, I thought that's what it was really about, but really I see now how I'm an integral part of a whole that's evolving, and I'm a part of this. And so it's a service to be able to increase our capacity to participate in this ongoing process of awakening and evolution.
Yeah, and I think what's powerful about this is that it recaptures, as we're talking about it, particularly in the Christian tradition, a robust understanding of freedom, which I think is tremendously important. There's a teaching in Christianity that appeared over time to which I do not fully or really actually partially subscribe, except in some different ways, of predestination. You might have heard of that term. This idea that somehow the unfolding of time is predestined by God, and that we are only fulfilling a script that has been already set, and that our path in that is at varying levels, predetermined, with freedom in the middle of it all, but really the overarching theme is pretty well set. And that theology is a very huge theology in many Protestant churches. It is not necessarily accepted by all Christianity. In fact, depending on who you talk to, it's not accepted at all. This idea that God has set everything in place. What there is God's sovereign, if we want to use sovereign, but this God's overarching love and overarching presence, which is there, but this possibility that we are being called into a life that we have a hand in making ourselves. That actually is, and as I understand it, more in line with what we would call the Old Testament and the New Testament, that we have a path into which we can live and be full, and it's our unique path, and guess what? We're free not to awaken. We are. You are completely free not to awaken.
But eventually, Hazrat Khan, who brought Sufism to the West, said, ultimately, every atom will have its moment of awakening. So you have as long as you want.
As long as you want. As long as you want.
For a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Christianity is somewhat some speculative branches of Christianity talk that way, but at the same time, there's a whole lot of Christianity that does say, in the fullness of time, that all creation is in this path of reconciliation, and that is all available in the fullness of all time. The reason this is important is that there also is an accompanying theology of predestination, which is called double predestination. Is that not only are people pre-chosen into some salvific glory upon their death, but also the ones that are doomed to what we would call hell or something else are also predetermined, which then that theology really limits any kind of freedom. And the mystics say to that, no, that's not what's going on here. And admittedly, the predestination, double predestination is a very, very Protestant thinking, very Protestant theology. Eucharistic, or we might call sacramental life, kind of resists that, pushes against that. So we don't talk about that much in this parish or in the Episcopal Church, but it certainly is kind of the theological framework of Christianity in our context. So mysticism going into predestination is a weird and toxic mix. So when mystic Christians come into contact with radical predestination-based Christians, there's kind of a, what are you talking about? This divine presence with God, this living and becoming fully unitive in your life. God's got it figured out. We're either going to go to heaven or go to hell. What the heck? Which, and that's the awakening thing, and to which mystics typically say, oh, we have nothing to talk about. It's like a National League and American League sometimes.
Well, and this is what I would call Newtonian spirituality.
Right. That's
first of all, the ultimate dualism is manifestation and God separated.
Right.
And part of this Newtonian spirituality is things in existence evolve. Yeah, we'll grant Darwin that, but certainly not God, because God is perfect and unchanging. Well, if there's a relationship between manifestation and what we call God or the divine or the transcendent, and this is a living relationship, then both ends of that have to co-evolve with each other. And the Sufis say that creation happened because God was a hidden treasure desiring to be known, to love, and be loved. And it goes on to say that the divine could only know of him herself through manifestation And how does the divine know that? Through the awakening of beings in manifestation. And there's a wisdom that is accrued through our own life experience that comes back in what's called the returning light to the divine, where now the divine is able to know the divine's own self in a way that wasn't possible except for you and everyone else and everything in nature, every rock, every river, and so on. So there has to be this coevolution, which is certainly consistent with quantum physics, where everything is entangled, everything is interconnected with each other, that there's a probability of what's going to happen, but you can't nail it down, because if you nail down this side of it, then the other side you can't know anything about. So that's how I think about karma. I did a class previously, which is on the YouTube channel, on karma, and karma is thought to be the dues that we have to pay or cash in on from the good or bad that we've done in the past. I think karma is a Newtonian notion. Karma is certainly the tendencies that drive us from the past, our conditioning, but we can free ourselves from our conditioning. And it doesn't mean we don't have things to work on. If we have old patterns that have been destructive and we've done damage, we need to do something about that. But we're not bound in that. That's a very Newtonian model of, there's a scorecard up in the sky. Well, okay, you've got to burn up all your good and bad, and then you get to go to whatever you think the destination is. So I believe in the principle that I call the optimization of light. And what I mean from that is I believe that light has an inherent tendency to find ways to express greater and greater capacities of itself. And I'm not just talking about physical light or the light of the sun. It's like the light of existence. And our universe, we talked about the nature of reality is a tendency to self-organize to higher states of being. And there's chaotic periods in between. And we're certainly in a very chaotic period worldwide right now. There's a transformation happening, and we don't know what's going to be on the other end of it, but something is certainly transforming. And in this process of evolution to a higher state, there's certainly periods that look like things are going backwards, and they may be for a time, but ultimately the whole thing is moving towards a higher state of being, and we've helped to further that by our conscious participation in that. And again, that's how our awakening is a service, and also our awakening increases our capacity to put forth energy and consciousness that is an antidote to all the negativity that's very much in abundance in the world right now. The Sufis have this term called a muwakkil. I don't know exactly how you spell it, something like M-U-W-A-K-K-A-L, but it's like when we have a thought, there's like a thought form that is put out there, and these thought forms, Hosmer Khan said, have a life of their own, and some of them don't last very long. Some of them last a long time, and if there's a group of many people with similar thought forms, those thought forms have a power to them. Mm-hmm. But the remedy to that and all the negativity is not to go, okay, we're going to do battle and put out these thought forms, we're going to bash heads with those thought forms, is to come to a higher state of awareness, a higher vibrational level in alignment with other people with similar intentions, whether it's for peace in the world or healing or understanding. And the power of that is so much greater than even the collective power of no matter how many people are caught up in a negative loop. Yeah. So that's what we can do about what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things you said just a minute ago is this idea of God being caught up in the evolutionary, that divine unfolding and divine evolution is happening as well. In my head I was hearing the arguments, as I've had this conversation with some folks, saying, but that's not scriptural. And I'm just telling you, it is. Throughout the Old Testament, there are little hints that there's a divine human conversation unfolding. And that there has been at the very beginning a divine human conversation. It's God's conversation with Moses on top of Mount Sinai, where God wants to get rid of everybody. And Moses says, okay, back off a little bit. It's the conversation with God wanting to get rid of everybody in Sodom and Gomorrah, and Job Abraham says, now wait a minute, let's not get rid of everybody. Maybe if there's like 1,000 really good people, no, I wouldn't. And then Abraham talks them all the way down, I think, to 10 or something like that. And it turns out there weren't even that many. But this idea of God learning and God repenting, God puts the rainbow in the clouds because God says, never again will I do that. God repents of what happened after Noah and the great flood. So this idea of God's eternal relatedness, interrelatedness, that somehow the creation in the earliest testaments of the scriptures and the Creator are intertwined, are interwoven, and that their destinies somehow are woven together in some sort of beautiful way, which is tremendous. And I think mystically that's what's unfolding in the revelation of Jesus of Nazareth, that there is an intertwinedness that is unfolding, that our life is interwoven together, and that we are not separate from one another. Divine and God, we're always interwoven.
And we could say God is going to school with us.
Yeah, right.
Is learning along with us. Only God has a lot more pupils in God's school than maybe we are aware of. So one other thought, the Sufis talk about the allegory of our soul. Mm-hmm. It's like our soul's story. And there have been these beautiful books written about the allegory of Avicenna, the allegory of the soul of Ibn Arabi, of the Prophet Muhammad, and so on. But each of us has the allegory of our own soul. So a practice that you might want to do over the next week every now and then is to take a look at what's your story been to date? What's been the story of your soul? What's the gist of it? If you had to pull out the essences of what you've learned and what's transformed in you, what would that look like? And then you can realize you don't have to settle for a linear continuity of what that story has been. So that's the direction it would go in if you just kind of put up things on autopilot. But how would you like it to become? What would you like that story to look like? And you don't have to plot out all the rest of the story, because the last part of the series title, Pathways to Freedom Evolution, is and the next step. What's your next step in your spiritual journey of awakening? And it's going to be different from anybody else's next step. And you may have something that comes to you intuitively, and then the old thought patterns go, oh no, that's no big deal to just do this. I've always, what I got was I've always wanted to learn to do so-and-so, and what does that have to do with spirituality? Well, maybe it has everything to do with you, a way of expressing something in you that you've never given vent to, allowed to come forth. So don't chop it off at the roots. If you get something that comes up, let it kind of sit for a while, and maybe test the waters, try it out for a little bit, and see what opens up in you as you go in that direction.
Yeah. Well, we've got a few minutes left. I mean, is there any thoughts or ahas or things we didn't get to?
Well, we mentioned the body, and I've found for myself that that's one of the most important experiences of agency and guidance that has happened for me. And I'm still interested in learning more about the body and how to express the truth of it without triggering discomfort.
In this way, I'm not going to say Judeo-Christian because I'm not going to speak for Judaism. I'm going to say the Christian trajectory of relatedness with bodies is problematic. Very early on, Augustine was part of this, but not only him. There was a suspicion of the body and bodiness and the signals that the body gives to an individual. And there's all kinds of talk about how we got there. There's there's Greco-Roman philosophy that was part of that, that became connected to Jewish and Christian theology. This suspicion of the createdness of things as being verifiable or valid conveyors of divinity. This idea, very Platonistic idea, that all of the validness of God is other than us. So our bodies, as diminutive shadows on the wall, can't be relied upon to be very trustworthy narrators of divine experience. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does.
So what a lot of Christianity has been doing now is trying to get further back to a really very early Jewish and Christian understanding that our bodies can be trusted, that they can tell us something about not only ourselves, but ourselves as the divine also is wrapped up in that there may be something we can learn from our bodies and understand from our bodies about all of it.
The history, the further you go back,
Uh-huh.
the more you realize that we kill ourselves.
Yeah. It's a really poor translation of, and theological interpretation of the Garden of Eden, I think, is part of where that
And
is.
we're still doing it.
Yeah, we do it over and over
We
again.
don't even have, we don't have a good path back to the beginning where it was sacred.
But we can carve out the path from now forward. Even if you just start with the body as a temple,
That's right.
well, what's that like if the body is a temple? How is that going to affect my way of being in the world? So you don't have to look at all that's been and all the distortions that have been, because it may take a long time to climb out of that pit.
Long time.
And you don't need to. You can just go, okay. If you want to add another axiom, go right ahead. Your body is a temple. Your body is sacred.
Gil, our sexton who retired recently, gave me a prize. He said, I have something I'm going to give you. And he led me out to his truck and pulled out this denim cap that was lavishly decorated with symbols that spelled out the word right here, G-O-D.
Oh, wow.
Gil, I said, I can't wear this. Oh, yes, you can. It was my mother's. And his
Oh.
mother was very important to him.
Oh, it's a huge sacred gift.
Huge gift to receive. And I could not turn it down. And I've worn it very few times for a short period among a few select friends.
You know, humorously, we say to someone, put on your big boy pants. Well, how about putting on your God
Cap.
being,
Your God suit.
your God suit, and live from that?
Well, I'm happy to say I'm running into more people that I can share that with.
Thank you so much, Don.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Great.
And I don't know who you're rooting for.